Alvin Bragg, the DA, he had till today to file the a response from the DA's office to President Trump's team about dismissing the case that Alvin Bragg brought, this 34 felonies, all related to a law that's federal, that had all these issues on appeal already about whether or not this was even an appropriate charge to bring. Could you actually attach a federal law as a DA that does not usually they do not go into court and represent federal laws. They use state laws, local laws, but they don't have the ability to then add federal charges. That would be usually done in a separate federal case, which here, those federal cases, anything related to that was never brought. And then on the other federal cases are gone because he's incoming president of the United States. But Alvin Bragg wants to have it both ways. So he realizes the judge is under normal kind of practice in New York would be the dismissal. You haven't had time to go on appeal. You have not really, you are, again, this case is, you haven't seen the full, plethora of justice, if you will. So how it stayed, if you were appealing it, if things were dropped, but some charges weren't, like misdemeanors, and what would that mean for potential sentencing and these issues? So here's how he does it quickly. He says, one is you could just stay this until the end. Now, the problem with that is that that does affect presidential immunity, even though presidential immunity isn't in effect 100% when you're out of office. We've found from the Supreme Court and other cases that there is presidential immunity that exists, and certainly executive privilege, I'd say, under that immunity. So it makes it that much more difficult to bring a former president to trial, because so much of his work and so much of his conversations he has with people who you're trying to force to testify, or even filing against and bringing charges against in hope that they will testify for a lesser charge, or if to drop the charges. And those cases fell apart too. So they look at both, not just your time as president, but also while you're president, if you know that there's a jail sentence hanging over your head, that still is probably has a decent effect on the idea of presidential immunity and your ability to think clearly, because or don't know exactly whether or not the day you're out of office, if you will be a week or two away from entering into some kind of prison or confinement. So Alvin Bragg's next decision or option for the judge in this case, he goes to Alabama. It's not used in New York at all. But Lord, nothing in this case was normal, because a DA was trying to attach federal charges to supposed misdemeanors on mishandling business expenses, these kind of things. The Alabama rule, it states that when a defendant dies, so in this case, Donald Trump would have been claimed to have died because he would no longer have been subject to the jurisdiction of the court. So it's even taking the Alabama rule and it's furthering it. And this could be very abusive, as you can understand, to people's rights in court, because what it does in Alabama is that if someone dies before you're found guilty, or after you're found guilty, but before your conviction becomes final through the appellate process, the court places in a record of the case a notation to the effect that the conviction removed the presumption of innocence, but was neither affirmed nor reversed on appeal because the defendant died. So you're not guilty, but they do acknowledge that you might be found not guilty if you hadn't, quote, died. Now, of course, President Trump is not dying by being president of the United States. I'm not even sure if he would accept this and wouldn't want to appeal this himself. Maybe he just shrug his shoulders and say, crazy New York case, done, finally, over, goodbye, if they want to go to this Alabama rule. But you could also see a way where you think about it and go, you know what, no, I'm not going to let you change this. It doesn't seem right for court systems to be able to randomly change their normal practice, where they have to go out and find some rule in Alabama that gets to say that you were found guilty, but you just weren't ever sentenced and you never got your appeals on that. So 1-800-684-3110. Trump derangement syndrome is still so, it is just flowing through the veins, if you will, and the minds of these prosecutors and this anti-Trump movement. They don't know what to do. Some are at first they were very, down on their luck. Then you have California saying we're going to fight everything. You'll have political moves, of course, but you also see that the country is pretty calm. What the Democrats predicted did not occur. There's not mass protest. There's not huge issues and concerns about who the next president is. In fact, there's been this coalition brought together that's never been as broad before. But I just put this forward so that you understand why, when we talk about the work that needs to be done over these just next 4 years is so critical. It is going to be very difficult work to get the bureaucracy in Washington under control and to get our court systems back to living in a reality where they aren't going to say, well, we'll hold you as dead but convicted, so that at least we keep that conviction. Their other option was to say you do basically the same thing as the first one and a little mix of the second one, and you just say, but you'll never face jail because this was a mostly misdemeanors and you've never been charged with a felony before. So that concern would not hang over the president's head and thus affect presidential immunity, which goes into place while the president is in office and trying to make decisions about the future and thinking, wow, I've got this potential sentence hanging over my head. I think, again, Alvin Bragg just throwing the whole kitchen sink out there, Will, hoping and probably praying that he gets something to stick against President Trump that he can put up on his wall.
That's right. And the context of this being filed, obviously, this is an 82-page brief. There was a lot of research to come up with this Alabama rule to be used in this situation. So I don't think they came up with this on Monday. But in the light of his loss in court with the Daniel Penny trial, which was a big, high-profile case out of the Manhattan DA's office, there's a loss there in the public spotlight. We talked about yesterday even about the New York councilwoman calling for a federal DOJ Civil Rights Division investigation into the Manhattan DA's office. It's clear that Alvin Bragg thinks the judge may even side with the president and just get it out of his court. So he's trying, as you said, throwing everything at the wall to try and see what sticks. And when you read from this is on page 32 of his filing, where he admitted that New York doesn't follow this Alabama rule. But he says, in this way, the Alabama rule abates the criminal proceedings without vacating the underlying conviction or dismissing the indictment, and says it makes sense to borrow from the manner in which courts address abatement because many of the defendant's arguments here parallel the arguments made in favor of dismissal and vacatur upon a defendant's death. So he's trying to put that in the judge's mind that what they're arguing about him becoming president and not being able to continue the appeals or other processes in court because he's sitting president, they're arguing a parallel argument to the death of a defendant. It's just wild to see him even put in writing, while New York follows this, you should try this new thing. I don't typically think judges like to be the one that tries out the novel theory unless they really just want to make a name for themselves. But Judge Merchan has already had so much pressure and spotlight on him during this, trying to take this novel path. I hope he doesn't choose that. I think what the right thing to do is just say, get this out of here, make this go away. Yeah. But we'll see what happens. It is ultimately up to the judge in this case, and we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I think, honestly, folks, what we have to do here is follow it closely, see what potentially may need to be done in the future, because this is bad precedent setting. And it just is a reminder that President Trump is coming into, again, yet a hostile bureaucracy at the federal and local and state level, and that to fight this fight, to cut government, to cut the size of government, all of that has to, we have to really have his back and the members of Congress who are doing it, their back, because they are going to face that same whirlwind that Chuck Schumer talked about when you attempt to really affect how the Washington machine works, because then you can have traditionally even like Republican companies that do most of their business through Republican lobbying, things like that, are more likely to do better under Republican governments and executive branches getting nasty, as well as on the left.